Yes, we are live.
Good evening to you all. This is Kiran Keshavamurthy, and on behalf of Anajuri, I welcome you all to today's session on gender and sexuality. Today's speaker is Shivlal Gautam, who is a queer activist in Assam, who co-founded Homonai, an intersectional queer feminist group. He's also a co-organizer of the annual LGBTQIA+ Guwahati Pride Walk and a community citizen journalist with Varta Trust, Kolkata. His area of work has been in providing peer counseling, community mobilization, awareness generation, content writing, sensitization, workshops, research, training, and documentation on gender, sexuality, health, and human rights of gender and sexual minorities in Assam. The title of his talk is History of Queer Movement in Assam and the Intersection of Law with the Process of Community Mobilization across the state. So on behalf of Anajuri, I welcome you, Shivlal, to today's session. We look forward to listening to you and hearing you.
Thank you very much, Kiran. I'm very glad to be here today
Yes.
for a much important discussion. And just a request, like there might be some issues with my network, so please feel free to let me know whenever my the network fluctuates. And if anyone has any questions during the session, please feel free to raise a hand or drop your comments. I would be very glad to kind of keep engaging with the questions as they come during my discussions. Yep.
Yes. So I think
Yeah.
generally what we do is we take question answers towards the end of the talk, so that way it will be a little bit more coordinated. So
Okay. All right. That's also fine. Yep.
yeah,
Yeah. So, yeah. So shall I get started?
please do.
Yep. Yeah. So hello everyone. As Kiran mentioned, that the topic today is on the queer movement here in our state of Assam, and like the process of community mobilization that has been happening with intersection of various laws, how it has shaped the community mobilization, how mobilization here, how we have been localizing queer support here, and what has been done so far and how we have done it. So I think the movement here started when the 2013 judgment came, which overturned the 2009 verdict of the Delhi High Court, and it reinstated, it kind of brought back Section 377 on 11 December 2013. So, in as a mark of protest against that judgment, a lot of protests were happening in most places across the world, and Guwahati also happened to be one of those cities in India that was named a Global Day of Rage, GDR, and it was organized on 15th December 2013 near Digli Pukri Park entrance, where the Queer Pride Guwahati is like starts, the starting point of the Guwahati Pride. So it was, there were not a lot of people who turned up, probably like say a dozen to 20 people or so, but it has been very historical because that is the first time when a protest in favor of rights of the gender and sexual minorities took place in the state of Assam. So some and many things led to the other, and it was not just like say it was initiated only by queer persons. No, there were a lot of cis heterosexual allies who also took leads and who also came out to support the protest, and it just became the the stepping stone to much more further things in the state of Assam. And the discussion around the Pride Walk, it actually initiated a discussion in other parts of the country that no one expected something like this to happen in Assam, and especially here, in the region of Northeast. So they had a lot of support that came from other places across India as well. So and discussions happened. People thought that something more has to be done, and that led to the step of organizing the first Pride Walk, which was on 9th February 2014, the first ever Pride Walk in the entire Northeast region that happened in Guwahati. And the Pride Walk was pretty successful, and a lot of things actually happened. There was a lot of kind of violence that happened, vandalizing that happened. There were a lot of people from within the community who were against the Pride Walk because there were a lot of concerns being kind of shared that it will lead to exposure of the community, and taking context of Northeast, which is already kind of mired in so many issues of its own. This would be kind of jeopardizing the community further. But having said that, the organizers of the Pride Walk, they took the opinions, they took the concerns at hand, and they still went ahead. And the reason why we could also go ahead is because there was a huge support from the police here, and it still continues to this day. And actually, thing was that every year when we organize a Pride Walk, we always get threat calls of people wanting to kill us, or people just abusing us and all of that thing. But over the years, in the past, I think 3 years now, that has stopped. And even in the first Pride Walk, there was a political group which came to vandalize and harm the Pride marchers. But the police stopped them before they could reach the Pride marchers, and they kind of shoot them away. And they didn't even let the organizers or even the participants know that something like this happened. It's only at the end that people got to know. And I think that is a commendable job at the hands of the police. Pride Walks were huge success. People especially from Delhi and Mumbai and Kolkata also came for the Pride Walk, and other states in Assam. Importantly, Meghalaya and Manipur. So, and it led to a small film screening. Then later, it led to the formation of Hukia. Hukia, which is the first queer collective in Assam, which I was also a part of. And we did many things under Hukia, like coming up with brochures, to organizing film fest, to sensitization workshops. But something was lacking. So there was a deep concern, and there was a kind of a joke that we would have among each other, that probably I am the first and the last gay man in Assam with no connections to anyone, who have kind of joined the movement, and who have kind of um, who has come on board to work on the movement. And that was a very serious concern for all of us, because we would be kind of talking that where are we lacking, that people are not joining us, or not coming forward, or even when they are coming forward, why it is becoming a one time activity. So this is a concern that was kind of that kept kind of we discussing about. And it was a gradual process over, eventually over time we realized that a lot actually needs to be done here. And the presence of the law section 377 was a huge a kind of a deal breaker, and it was a roadblock to people actually to come out and take the movement forward, or to even seek openly the help that they want, or to seek, openly talk about their own sexuality or gender identity. We still have very few activists and leaders who are working on ground, and we can count them just on our just like probably 4 or 5 of us who are working actually. So but then again, having said that, the leaders are few and far, but the community mobilization that has happened has been tremendous. Why do I say tremendous? Especially after the 2018 judgment, when 377 finally got decriminalized. If I use a very simple word, we were not um, held criminals for having consensual sexual encounter with adult men, or so that is something we were, the law which spoke about, which I won't go into details. So that was something we all of us enjoyed, the right to have consensual intimacy among adults in the safety of our home, or or any other place. So that is something that the law says. So what happened? So in this time between 2013 to 18, a lot of things happened. It's not just things got restricted to Kukia or to section 377. NASA judgment came in 2014, and with the recognition of the transgender community, a lot of trans voices also started to come up in the state. And gradually, there is one specifically focused trans group which came up in 2016 or 17, and a lot of mobile advocacy happened at the state level, and a lot of people have been involved in that process, which now this year led to the formation of a transgender welfare board. And now they have also come up with a shelter home for trans people. But having said that, the transgender welfare board or even the transgender shelter home is largely dominated by binary, like trans women, who fall under the binary category of a trans person. It doesn't, in my knowledge, it doesn't have anyone on board from the non-binary community or even from the trans men community. And same with the the shelter home as well. But nonetheless, it is still a very great stride for the trans rights. Probably it will lead to more conversation around inclusivity and diversity among, inside the trans movement itself. So that is something about the trans movement. And there is a group that also came up, a collective that also came up in Tejpur, which is called Hobdo. And Hobdo, it came up in around 2017, 17-ish, and they had a film festival, a film screening at Teshwar University, which led to the formation of the group. And they have also been doing a lot of things in their capacity to take the narrative around queer rights in the district of Sonitpur and Tejpur. And in that moment, there was a there was a kind of a friction among the collective that I was a part of, in Hukia. And then few of us we came out from the collective, and there was a gap of say 6-7 months, where we were also kind of contemplating that what next to do. There were a lot of, actually not a lot of people know this, but we were quite a few, probably a dozen or more people who wanted to carry forward the movement and the discussion in our own capacities. And but then again, things are really not forming, things are really not going ahead as we were thinking it to go ahead. But what really kind of made an difference was the judgment on 6 September 2018. It really kind of gave a moral boost. It gave a lot of kind of a encouragement to finally do something, and that is how Homonnoi was formed, which I am a co-founder of. And I have seen in that period, when we formed Homonnoi, it was formed on 1st November 2018 to this year. In whatever capacity we have been doing, like I have seen a lot of growth in community mobilization. The way the community came forward, it has a lot to do also with the law, because the law was holding people, though it didn't criminalize you for being gay, but there was a lot of misconception, there was a lot of fear among people, they might be persecuted, or people might use it, and the fears were not something unreasonable. There have been a lot of times, there have been a lot of cases where people have been historically the law has been misused to blackmail, to harass them, both at the hands of various administration, or even at the hands of abusers or blackmailers in dating applications, or any other social media apps. So so the fears were something that concerned a lot of people. So when finally the law said that, and it is a very important historic judgment, where it was also said that the history owes an apology to the LGBTQ community in the country. So this was one of the judges, Indu Malhotra, who said that. So it is really a very like an encouraging kind of a judgment to have, and with so much of affirmative language being used. And there was a lot of noise, there was a lot of discussions, debates that happened in the media around Section 377. And I think it reached to the most rural places where we were unable to reach out. The media did reach with this discussion happening all around, from the vernacular media to the English media, everywhere. So wait so that was about 377 being finally arrested, and the formation of Homonnoi. And when we formed Homonnoi, we have been trying to do various activities, from holding a community led cultural program, to art exhibition, to having campaign as in a free consensual hug campaign across the streets of the city, to like doing many other things. And one of the important things that we realized is that the movement cannot be restricted only in the city of Guwahati. It has to go out. It has to go beyond the metro. It has to reach to the most unreached area, the most vulnerable of populations, the most like groups who do not have that resource or that amount of knowledge to do things in the own area. So what we have been doing through Homonnoi is that we have been identifying one person, one or two person in as many districts as possible, and we have been going to that place, probably doing a joint kind of a discussion, probably doing a joint kind of a meetup, where we are talking to people about about the importance of coming up with a queer group, about the importance of localizing queer support, about the importance of doing something in their own regions, and not being thoroughly dependent on few people who are geographically located in Guwahati, and the movement is very strictly located in Guwahati. And one also important thing that we have realized is that we have been going to also various educational setups, very reputed ones, to very unknown educational setups. So in comparison, with that, I have also observed that when we go and talk to a lot of assumed cis heterosexual community, And when we approach a lot of educational institutes, it does feel kind of half-baked because you have to do a lot of follow-up. But I have observed that, like, the time I invest in doing that one conversation, 1.5 hour of conversation or 2 hours of conversation in a school setup, if I give that 1.5 hour to the community people, I have seen much more impact happening there, the empowerment being there in the community. So, for because the community is someone who are coming to us, looking for us, who are at need, who are in need for support. But for a lot of heterosexual people, cis heterosexual people, it's more about educating them, and it's more about trying to change a perception that they have, trying to reduce the the stigma, trying to reduce the ignorance that they have, which doesn't happen overnight, which doesn't happen by just one call. And we cannot be arrogant about it that I went to one educational institute, I had a wonderful discussion. No, it doesn't happen that way. We cannot be so ambitious when we talk about engaging with a lot of cis heterosexual community, because we have to go with a mindset that they know nothing, that we have to start from zero. We have to give them, make them learn all the letters. We have to teach them all the alphabets. We have to teach them all the numbers. Whatever is there is like teaching them a new language. Is that complicated? So I'm not reducing, I'm not like discrediting the importance of reaching out to schools and colleges or any other workplaces, but this is a experience that I've had over over a period of 6-7 years now, of the differences that I have seen. So when I reach out to a place like Lamding, or when I reach out to a place like Bongaigaon or Kokrajhar, or those remote places where the support do not actually reach out, Nolbari, I have seen that people themselves come to us, and these are the community people I'm talking about. And it really helps in identifying that one leader. It helps in localizing that queer network over there. And we do not have to see for numbers, not at all. Even 2 or 3 people who come on board is considered that as something successful. That should be something to be celebrated, that we actually spoke to 2-3 people, and these 2-3 people will speak to 2-3 people. That is how the numbers increase, that is how the mobilization happens. Do not go with the arrogance, or with the whole idea, or with the whole expectation that 100 or more people turn up. No, there will be hardly 5 people, there will be hardly 3 people, but that's okay. That is how we have to go, that is how we have to see. We also have to realize that these are rural places with very less resources, and we have to, as leaders, we have to find a way of engaging with them. And the reward and the outcome is really rewarding, positively rewarding. So the way that the community mobilization that we have been doing, the localizing that we have been managing to do, is, I will say, I'm very proud of the way that we have done. So initially, in the event that we would conduct, or even the workshop that we would conduct, we would kind of, expect at least, oh, I wish at least 20 people or 30 people turn up. That would be our expectation. So now when we do any kind of event, we actually have to tell people to wait outside, or to like let the already in people to take their time. So this is something that has kind of happened to us. So with the turn around of over 250 people to sometimes even 300 people, or even for a meeting, even for a informal meeting, say, which is very haphazardly organized, we easily get 60 to 70 people turning up just like that. So this is something we used to struggle even say 2-3 years back, and now it is completely different. And that is something which the law has also been able to which has helped us, which is also something which we have also kind of, if I may say, cracked the code, by expanding the uh, movement beyond the city of Guwahati. So that is something that is happening. And right now, what we have also been doing is, added, like, we have been supporting a lot of people who are actually say affected by the whole COVID situation. So this is completely another level of mobilization, another level of networking, another level of reaching out that we have been doing, of reaching out to that person, to those affected person who are struggling to even afford one time of a meal in a day, or who are struggling, who are going through their gender affirmation process and are even struggling to afford hormones, which for a lot of people would be a mere 1500 people, but for that trans person, a 1500 rupees is a lot of money. And not having access to that money, and having to stop that process of gender affirmation process, is also very harmful, because for a lot of trans people, along with the education, having a gender affirmation is very, very important, and there is no help that has been coming from the state. I have been working, there is an ongoing database that we have been creating from Varta, where we have listed like a lot of queer affirmative like health practitioners and legal aid practitioners. And I had gone to GMCH, and I spoke to the most the most experts, like the most the most highly expert people, doctors in their fields of vaginoplasty, or or breast implants or something or the other, or liposuction or something or the other, or or say say plastic surgery. And I was very kind of disappointed to know that did not cater to trans people. So what it does, this is also another level of networking and community mobilization that we have to take care of. We cannot say that only by localizing the queer support and network, we have achieved a lot. No, we also have to see what is the need of the community. Where are the places that they are going to? Um, so where are the places they are going to, like who are the people they're approaching, like from health workers, who are dealing with sexual health like HIV, STDs, or gender affirmation care, aftercare, pre-care, or mental health, or legal aid, and in the schools, colleges, workplaces, like food security, or equal job opportunity, uh, many things. So we have to, and even for the many NGOs, there are many other NGOs which are existing across the state of Assam. So partnering with them, creating a resource of them, which is something we have been doing. So anyone now who reaches out to us facing any sort of violence, so what we do is that in our capacity, we put them in touch with those organizations who already have probably say like team in their district, say women organization, or child rights organization, for people who have been facing issues of sexual abuse when they were children, or underage queer person who have been facing issues of sexual abuse. So we connect them to child rights organization, we connect them to legal legal groups, we connect them to women groups if they're facing domestic violence. So this is also another level of I would say networking and mobilization that we have been doing, and which is also very much important and required. So this is another way of doing it. And uh, like with that, I think I also want to cover the whole NRC process, the National Register of the Citizens of India. And when the process was going on here in 2014, uh, actually, not a lot of us thought about that how it could hamper the queer people, especially the trans, non-binary, non-conforming people, and even cis, gay, bisexual, lesbian persons who have been, especially the ones who have been, um, thrown out of their families, biological families, and who do not have anything to show that they belong to that biological family, because this is what is required in the NRC, to show that you belong to that family and you belong to the state of Assam, or you are a citizen of the country. You are not an illegal immigrant. So this is something which is directly hampering. So a lot of people actually ask this, like, why is the queer community protesting against NRC? Like, I do not know about the rest of the country, but here in Assam, we are not protesting against the NRC. We are demanding that the NRC is inclusive of the trans community and the like non-recognized identities, especially the ones also make some provision for the people who are a victim of, say, family violence, the gay, bisexual, lesbian community. And this is the demand that has been, going on. So a lot of work has to be done in that area, especially. So we are hoping that when the next process of NRC updation happens, we are hoping that the queer community as a whole in Assam, there is a process, the government recognizes our issues, like, how we cannot show documents, or how it is really difficult for us to show documents, and create some provision how we can be included, and at the same time how the issue of illegal, if I may say, like 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 illegal way of kind of staying over the state, which the NRC basically handles, which is kind of taken care of. So this is how it has been. And please do not kind of get say by the whole movement of the NRC, because what people in other places of Assam are demanding, like other parts of the country are demanding, completely different. They're completely demanding for NRC to not even take place, but here we are demanding it to be inclusive. So our issue is different here in Assam, and the issue outside Assam is completely different. So this is our this is like how we have been voicing ourselves. This is what we have been demanding. And with the NRC, I also want to point out that the voices have actually been heard. The High Court have actually said that like the next process of NRC, they will be taking care of the whole issue that the community is facing. Pratik Haleja and the state coordinator of NRC, and and many other officials, they have assured that the next process NRC will be inclusive of the LGBT community. I had also written one article for Varta Trust, like on the whole impact of the NRC on trans community, and it was actually picked up, picked up by a lot of various media outlets, and also many other. Especially like BBC, which wanted to do kind of a interview with the trans and the other community persons of how what they are facing with the whole NRC process, how, what is the demand. And other thing was that change.org did a campaign on why NRC in Assam should be inclusive of the queer community, especially the trans community. So this is something the discussion has been happening. And when I also say mobilization and networking, it just doesn't has to be restricted to online activities or face-to-face interactions. So what I did, like writing on something which is relevant, writing on an issue which can help in the discourse getting helping the discourse being forwarded, or helping us to keep continuing the discourse around it. So writing is also another way of mobilization and networking and localizing also. So we shouldn't underestimate the power of like online writing and print media as well. So this is also something which is really very, very important. So so that is how like things have been like going ahead. Of course, unfortunately, with the whole COVID situation, we had a lot of plans of like doing a lot of things here, but with the whole COVID situation, that has kind of put all of us, not just the queer community. Of course, the queer community is one of the most marginalized communities, especially with the COVID situation, and we are trying to also find a way out on how we can like adapt to this situation, and at the same time take care of, not let the movement get hampered, and not let the work that we are doing suffer. So I think more or less I have added things here. So if I have missed out on something, please feel free to like let me know, or if you have any questions, please drop by, or I'll be happy to engage. Or if you have any critique or anything else to contradict to whatever I said, please feel free to do so. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, Kiran, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much, Shivlal, for your very informative talk, and also for drawing on your very rich experience of activism. I just had a few comments and questions to make from what you have said so far. One, of course, is the question of. I remember you were mentioning, you were talking about the first Pride walk that happened in 2014, and the fact that you received a lot of police support. So I was actually kind of curious to see that among many of the programs that you've been doing, many of the initiatives that you've been taking, have you actually been working a lot with the police in sensitizing the police and in trying to kind of create a queer-friendly environment, a queer-friendly attitude among the police?
So if I may say, we haven't had the opportunity to like directly say engage the police force, except for one or two events where we like spoke with the lot of like police officials at the higher post in the Assam headquarters located in Guwahati. So there I was one of the resource person who spoke about the issue of like on LGBT rights and everything. And what I have observed in my my experience is that the police force at the higher level especially are very, very sensitive on LGBT issues. This is something I'm not at all say say what do how do I say like sugarcoating or something. This is something, an experience that I have had over the years, especially whenever we have gone to like seek police protection. So in the first Pride Walk, and especially in the first film festival that we had in Guwahati town club, so we actually got police protection for the 3 or 4 days that the film festival was there. There were police all throughout the day till the evening, even female police constables and officers. So this is the level of the police support that has been happening. And one incident I want to highlight is that I think it was in 2016 or 17. Like what happened was that I think there was national games that was happening in Guwahati, and even this year or last year or something or the other. I think this year it was or last year, I forgot. The Filmfare Award was happening. So in these two incidents, what is happening is that the police officials were not permitting permissions. They're not giving permissions to a lot of protests, to a lot of rallies that was happening on street. So, like this is something which also makes me happy that probably we were the only ones in the city who got permission to hold the Pride rally. In 2016 or 17, when the games were happening, there was a lot of concern, and it was a very genuine concern. We met, we were trying to get hold of the DCP. I forgot his name, a very wonderful person, Sam Agarwala, and the SP, another wonderful person. So we have been trying, and they were extremely busy with the whole preparation, everything, and we had to wait in the police station, from morning till the evening just to catch a hold of them and talk to them. And we used to go every day. And finally, and the SP, he saw the persistence with which we were kind of approaching him, and he finally held a meeting with the DCP. We went, we spoke to him, we told him of the importance of doing the Pride walk and why we cannot push the date because all the preparation had been done. And also one thing I want to raise is that we are not we as a group, even in Hukia, Homonoi, the Queer Pride Guwahati, we have never ever taken funds or sponsorship from any capitalist organizations or anyone else. It is completely crowd funded and crowdsourced, whatever money. So we always try to keep the budget as low as possible, because at the end it is a rally. We do not have to put so much of money. That is what we also think, that we don't have to put so much of money in organizing a Pride rally when it can be done in a very low price. So I think this year it was something around 20,000 or something, comparatively to other places very, very, very less, and we had an outturn of around 1,000 people. So when we kind of explain all these concerns to the DCP, and we also told that people from various other states and even outside the country are coming for the Pride Walk, and the tickets are done. And he was very kind enough to allow us to held the rally. Only one change that he requested, that we do not walk in the streets. So we were very happy to comply. We also understood the concern of the security, because players from all across the country came to Guwahati. So of course the security becomes a concern. But even then, they allowed us actually to have the Pride walk. And the DCP said something very encouraging, was that this is your right, this is your human right, and no one can take that away from you. So I'm supportive, I'm always there for the cause. So hearing that from the DCP itself was truly great. And this is at the high level. So at the lower you might say hierarchically lower level, we have faced issues, some OC or some other people at the police stations would pass some comments, because our faces are very visible, because we go every year, and they know that, oh, these people are something odd or something, they see that way. Initially we did get comments, oh my goodness, or some kind of body language which was not affirmative. But right now it has completely changed. Right now people actually the people who even issue the permission, or when we go to collect the permission, they even start asking us questions or engage with us. And this year one of the SPs, he actually came for the Pride walk. He posted pictures, he clicked pictures with us, and the official page of Assam Police uploaded that picture also. So this has been I would say a great leap from the police force. And not just from the police force, even in the media. I want to give just one example. When the first Pride happened, one of the local media papers, they wrote, Hatat Guwahati Rajpotot Ulai Ahise Homokami, which translate, suddenly there is an outpour of homosexuals in the city. That was the headline in the front page, followed by a 2-page story, completely homophobic and transphobic. But right now, we have observed every year, we document those articles which get printed. So now in the vernacular media, either they refrain from making any derogatory remarks, or if they do not want to write something affirmative, so they just put a picture and they just say like homocoming, like pride rally or something or the other. So that is how English media, of course, it has been tremendously supportive and everything, all of it. And for whatever thing it has been, the language and everything has really been great. So, I think this is how things have been going with us. Even for the medical fraternity, even with the mental health practitioners, lawyers, we see these days that earlier we used to struggle. If one case would come to us, we used to struggle who to refer the person to. Now we have so many options: psychiatrists to clinical psychologists to just peer counselors to legal experts to criminal or something or the other, or dealing with house or violence. There has been a lot of like say mobilization that has happened even with the many other like stakeholders. So I think this is how we have been. Of course, a lot has to be done, but this is also how it has been like going ahead. Yep.
Thank you. I just also wanted to ask you on something that you just ended your answer with, which is this whole idea of when you're talking about community mobilization and what Homona has been doing in terms of community mobilization, especially in the rural areas. So how easy has it been? Because Homona is not a very old organization, but let's say for the past 2 years, how easy has it been to actually strike collaborations with people who will be of help to you in terms of doctors or lawyers, or, activists? I mean, how easy has it been striking those collaborations? And and you also, I think, mentioned people who have been going out to these different districts in Assam, trying to create awareness. I mean, are these people from those districts? And how easy or what has the response been to your initiatives to actually go out to rural areas, very remote locations, and talk about these issues? Has there been violence? What's the response been?
So for your first question, like say with the professionals coming from various like areas, coming from various stakeholder groups. For them, I think the start for us was like what we did. This was very initial when we were in Hukia. Um like I and my two, three more colleagues, Abhishek, Debika, Pragati, a few of four of us, what we did was that we reached out to and we used to actively work with the Zain that we used to come up, we tried to come up once annually. So for that matter, we once went to meet with a clinical psychologist. And how it also happened with us is that also by the community themselves. So there would be trans persons who would approach, who we would, get in touch with. And, we would just kind of have a conversation, how it has been for them. And they would mention about so and so professional. And some back then, this is something I'm talking about 2015 and 16. Back then, having such a professional here in Assam was a huge thing. Even now, the country or even the people all across the world suffer from having queer affirmative, practitioners or people, who render the services to us, like the queer community. So we thankfully managed to reach to one clinical psychologist, and through her, just happened through snowballing. We asked her who she would recommend, or who they would recommend, or he would recommend to for us, to and we would explain them that what we are doing, what is the purpose of the list, and how we are going forward with this, and they would help us, and they would help us in with the purest of their hearts, without kind of, just advocating anyone just for the sake of it. Someone who they really believed would be good for the community. And that is how we have been going forward. And second thing is that Varta Trust, with whom I have also been engaged since 2018, like we have an online directory. It is hosted. I'll also type it at the end. Please remind me. www.varta, V-A-R-T-A, Varta, Vartagen, G-N-Gen.org, vartagensex.org, vartagensex.org. So what we have been doing is that pan India, we have this is constantly being updated. We have been coming up with a online directory of queer affirmative professionals who deal with sexual health, mental health, legal aid services across the country. So we have few people here from Assam and other places in Northeast. And that is how it has, and there is a lot of process that goes. We do not just randomly add people. There is a lot of process to follow, and that is how we add. And after adding, we also do a lot of follow up with them. Like, if they need any kind of support, like, to understand the issues more or something or the other. But that is how we have been going. And the response has been good. So response have been really very good. So now I really do not have to struggle that who do I put if a person reaches out to me, who do I put to, or even with the police. Like there have been cases of family violence where we have helped the community persons escape those violent families to another cities, and that is with the help of the police. So it's not like just like say what we do is or even getting people married, like people in love not being accepted or something or the other. We take the risk. It's a risk. It's a big risk. It's a huge risk. But nevertheless, that is what we strive. That is what we go ahead. There are consequences of it to us. But at the end, we also believe that when we started Homonoi, we started with the purpose that it is community-based. It is community-centric. So whatever comes in our capacity, we are going to deal with it. And how we also dealing with it is also because we know we have support. We also know when we are in trouble. If I may put it, like I was getting a lot of threats recently when I was doing a fundraising for the trans community, especially the Hijra community. There were fake allegations of, calling me various sort of names without taking my name. But it was obvious who they were pointing it out to. And there was a lot of negative campaigning that was being done to me in various queer groups, WhatsApp group, Facebook groups, personally one to people, and even in the Facebook pages and all of that thing. I braved it. And how I braved it? Because I have a very strong network and support of advisors, or legal to emotional to any sort of thing, or mental. So this is how see, at the end, we as activists also have to think about our own mental health concerns, which very few people cater to. So we also need to, because we take so much of things, we have a helpline, 24/7 helpline that we run. That is something we came as an immediate measure for COVID. People affected by COVID who could call us or message us all 24/7, the day. So the emotional taxing, that all of these issues have on us. There have been cases of so many violence, especially now with the whole COVID, of people being stuck at the home because schools, especially teens, because schools, colleges were the place where they could be themselves, where they could assess some sort of support. But that is absent completely now because they're 24/7 stuck at their homes, and they cannot do anything, and they have to be with the violent families and all of that thing. So this is how it has been helping us. This is how we have been going. The whole suicide cases that have been coming up to us, the whole the many crisis situation that comes to us in our line because of COVID and everything. Anyway, it was not a rosy picture anyway, but so even but especially with the whole COVID, it has increased multifold. Yep. Hello?
No, I think we just had to put off your camera because of the connectivity. And I think I asked you another question. Okay. There was a second question about.
Yep. Yeah. So when it is about reaching out to the whole other districts in Assam. So how we have been doing is, like say, if we are invited to colleges or school, it is mostly by people who already live in that particular district, and they call us because they think or they know that we are the probably the best persons, resource person who can and these are people also who are struggling in their own campuses or in their own schools, because of not being an inclusive environment in their places, work like study places. And this is one process of going ahead when it comes to interacting with the assumed cis heterosexual community, and but when it comes to say engaging with the people from our community, the queer community, the process has been by you know by own personal contact. And there are also many other things. See, there are a lot of places which have targeted interventions. So targeted interventions are basically TIs which work on HIV prevention, treatment, cure, prevention, and all of that thing, STD, STI of the and they work with a vulnerable population. So you will have these are the projects under Assam State Health Control Society and National AIDS Control Organization. So they will have small subgroups in many districts across the country, and we also have in many places here in Assam. So with some of them, and they have many people who work as community outreach workers, or community mobilizers themselves. So we also take their help because they already are in touch with the community. So they mostly they work, they help, they give information around safe sex practices and all of that sexual health thing, and we get in touch with them, and then we that is how we have friendships, we have very good organic bonding, and that is also one of the process how we have gone through it. And also, of course, there are also many people who reach out to us with help, with asking us to do something in their particular region, and then we tell them to mobilize as many people as it is possible, whether it is through dating app or with their personal contact, and then we go, and how and we have a module or how we go. We briefly discuss why it is important to localize queer support, why it is important to have a queer network. We talk of our own experiences, how it has been for us, and we also assure that no matter what comes, like we are there to support and to help, and to give that assurance. We do not a lot of mistakes happen. Actually, people disappear by after doing one event or so. They do not stay in touch. This is a mistake we do not make. So when we go to a place or something or other, we immediately create a WhatsApp group or something, and then we stay connected. Or if people are uncomfortable with a WhatsApp group, we connect one to one and we stay in touch, and then we keep talking and discussing about things. So that is how it goes, and I'm very hopeful because the kind of networking that we have been able to do, the kind of mobilizing that we have been able to do, it is not something that we have pushed. This is something I always tell people, that it is not how we perceive how it should be, and it shouldn't be like how we want things to go. Like this is something I also talk from experience, because when I used to go to a lot of conferences across the capital or other places in the country, I would always ask this thing: why do you not take your pride to other place in Assam or Northeast? Then I would ask them, why don't you take your Delhi pride to Bhopal, or your Mumbai pride to Kolhapur or Nasik or some other place? So this is how people see it. People see Northeast as one homogeneous place and as just one identity. They do not know that we are of various multiple ethnic to migrated identities living in the state, in the whole region of Northeast. And we have many challenges here. We have state-sponsored violence, we have land issues, we have so many things to work around. So, and this is what I also keep telling people, that the movement here is in Guwahati and it is solid, but I cannot go and push and say that I want to do something there. It will never work. It will never work. It will fizzle out. It will die up. It will die as soon as it is started. That is what I have experienced. And right now, but when things come from the people of that particular place, they know their issue the best. Likewise, I know what is the best case scenario, what is the living experience of the people here in Guwahati and the periphery of the city. Likewise, these people, the community person, will know what it is like living in a place like Lamding, what are the challenges there, or what it is like living in Nolbari or Bongaigaon. These are places very nearby to Guwahati. Lamting is just 4 hours away. Nolbari is 1 to 1.5 hours away. Golpara is just 2 hours away, something or the other. Bongaigaon is just 3 hours away. Very nearby to Guwahati. But still, there is a huge demography, challenge over there. There's a huge barrier. There is a huge kind of a problem that exists there, and we have to identify that. We have to realize that it should be the people of that place should be coming to us. Of course, as leaders, what we can do is that we can empower the people there. We can empower in creating one leader. That is what our agenda has been. That is how our method has been, and it has worked wonderfully. And it has really worked wonderfully. And as community leaders, as change makers, as people who see who see around the whole movement here, we also realize that it's our responsibility in our capacity to keep doing a necessary follow-up, to keep engaging with people, and not like let go of what we have achieved in all these years, because it has been a great say sacrifices, which has been rewarding, which has been emotionally taxing, mentally taxing, which has been physically taxing. A lot of things happen, and we cannot let it die down just like that. And I am very kind of stubborn, and I'm very focused, if I may use that word, of what my vision is and how I want to take the movement forward before I retire, before I kind of give it all up for in retirement. And of course, there are many more plans up there in pipeline and many things to achieve. As I think one of the poems say, there are many miles to go before I sleep. So that is what go ahead with. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Shivlal. I just was actually also thinking that one of the perceptions that people have when they see, when they watch Pride marches, or probably probably one of the initial responses to the kinds of outreach activities you do in rural areas. One of the responses might be one of curiosity. It may not be hostility. They might be curious to know what you're doing. And when they are told what you're doing, then, one of the perceptions that people have, especially common people who have nothing to do with any of these issues, is that, is it just, a right to sleep with the person you want to sleep with? Sometimes it becomes a very kind of, that's a response that, do you kind of see sexuality in isolation from, caste or religion, class issues, religious issues, communal identities, and all that. So, I think even when you actually approach educational institutions and schools, one of the things that I'm sure an organization like you is already doing is to actually kind of talk about awareness about sexuality in a very large sense, not just in terms of safe sex, especially like in a lot of urban schools when they have sexual awareness or sexual education classes. It boils down to safe sex acts, but it's actually talking about larger issues of social consciousness, gender identities, and how gender and sexuality link up with other issues of caste, class, and communal identities. So, and I think you kind of touched upon that issue when you talked about the NRC and what impact the NRC has had on transgender people, uh, probably even more specifically so on Muslim transgender people. So, would you like to comment on that?
I think this is something which is very important to be raised. Like when I say when we go to other places in the district, uh, when it comes to community mobilization, one of the reaction that we get immediately is that, oh no, of refusal. People will refuse to come even when we assure them that this is a safe space. Nothing will go out. We even assure them that even if the picture they do not want us to publish, or even if give us WhatsApp status, will not go out. It is just for us to document. And if you are not comfortable to even come in the picture, we will not click you. Even then, even after giving so much of assurity and all of that thing, there is a lot of skepticism. There is a lot of curiosity on what exactly are these people going to do. Some even counter, oh, it is going to be a group orgy. So that is not something people assume, that it is going to be a sexual encounter among a lot of people. It is going to be an orgy, and it is oh, I might be sexually assaulted or violated, because these people are talking, saying that they are gay and they are bisexual and they are doing this and that. That is what unfortunately a lot of people from within the community also see themselves and others from the community itself. It's just not a problem of the how the cis heterosexual community see us. It is also the way the community people themselves have been saying. So when we actually go and talk, a lot of people actually are taken aback. Oh, these people are so decent. They're actually talking about, if I may use the word decent, which I do not like, but then again I do not get any other word here. So they say that, okay, the people are actually talking everything, because they come all dressed up and all of that, thinking that it's a large party. Even we did a the what do I say the art exhibition that we did. uh, 3 4 non-binary persons, they came, and they were like, oh, there's a party happening here, right? And they came all dressed up and glammed up and all dolled up, looking absolutely gorgeous. And they came up in the shining, like in such a hot day in May, in an art exhibition, and they were asking us, is there a party happening here? Where it is happening? And despite we being, and this is a kind of a measure we also take, that in our brochures or something, we make an effort of making bilingual, Assamese and English, and very simple art exhibition, this time, this place, so that people do not confuse. Even then people do. Even then people come with their own preconceived notions, and how it is going to be. So these are the things, I think, for me it's very amusing. And the whole kind of thought process that they come with, and the thought process that they go with. And what I have observed is that they have a lot of questions, and unfortunately also people do not know, like, if I may say, are very highly ignorant. People, even a lot of people don't even know that HIV or STI STD is having unprotected, or not being getting tested for HIV or something or the other. They do not even know that HIV is something that affects us. We are one of the most vulnerable population to for HIV, STIs, STDs. People do not even know that. People, the community people mockingly talk about their own sexual abuses. They talk in a jest of the very horrible forms of domestic violence that has happened to them. And it is kind of scary how they have normalized all of this thing. And at the same time also it's kind of worrisome, because it has become so normalized that, okay, we are so this way, we are feminine and everything, so it is going to happen to us. So there we have to say people, no, you are feminine, you are non-binary, you're a trans person, you do not fit into the whole gender norms, or you want to fit into one gender norm, which people do not see you or do not want you to be as, doesn't mean anyone has the right to bully, harass, or abuse you anyway. So and people actually think about it and everything, and they open up. There have been a lot of times where people have been extremely vulnerable and say emotional and crying and all of that thing, talking about experiences. So and this is where we also think that we need to kind of do not make them feel that they are victimized and victim, at and kind of empower them. Yes, the abuse, something happened, was horrible, but how do we handle this, tackle this in a way that it doesn't drown us? I have myself been a victim of sexual abuse twice. I have been a mental health, a patient of mental health and on medication myself since various years. I understand, what self-victimization does to us, and we as a community have a great, unmeasurable talent to victimize ourselves, which I something do not advocate and do not like, because we are already victimized, and when we victimize ourselves more further, it is a hellhole. It is not going to help us. It is not going to help us until and unless we realize that our strength lies in our vulnerability. Our strength lies in our many, many, many horrible experiences. That is how we empower the other people, by sharing our own experiences. That is how we also kind of deal with our own experiences. That is how we also kind of help ourselves. I'm not just talking about others, because it is always therapeutic to me to talk about my own experiences. I always come up as a stronger person whenever I speak, and in all the spaces that I get, that is my experiences. And I think that makes a change. So this is how we kind of go ahead with things. And again, as I previously mentioned, with a cis heterosexual community is a completely different ball game. All these issues are there. At the same time, since they do not belong from the cis heterosexual, from the queer community, having them interested in our issue, making them responsible allies, is a completely different challenge. Is a complete, and which is the reason I do not engage a lot on building allyship. It is important. I do not kind of negate the importance of allyship. It is important, but it is very taxing. So I focus more on community empowerment and mobilization. That is how I see the power getting structured and all of that thing. And even with the NRC thing, this is also what we kind of like whenever we kind of do any kind of an event, we try and see that people from various ethnicity and various languages are coming. I myself come from a multilingual, multicultural identity, like of having my roots in Mizoram, Meghalaya, Assam, Nepal, and God knows where. So, I also understand, I also know that I'm not an indigenous person in of Northeast. I am like someone who has migrated years back. I don't even know how long, but I am a citizen of Northeast. That is something I know. So, but I also know that it is not my place, say, when an issue of ethnicity comes up, ethnic minority, it is not my place to talk for them or to take the space that they have. It is not my place, and I'm very clear about that. Like, no matter what, I will not step in that, that podium or somewhere and talk about the issues of the other community, because that is not my living experience. What I can talk is about how I living as a Gorkhali, with my mother tongue being Nepali, my father being from Mizoram, my mother being from Meghalaya, my roots also being from Nepal, how the experience for me has been, and I can solely talk about myself because I do not know how it has been for them. It's completely, and I do not have that, the whole features where people call me chinky. People do not call me chinky. I have never faced the word chinky as a slur because I do not come across, or people do not perceive me as that way. I do not have that experience. What I have an experience is being discriminated because of not having opportunities or not having resources solely because belonging from Northeast. That is an experience I have, and that is what I'll talk about. Or being negated, being neglected when I go, or being like being held as the representative of the entire Northeast region, the whole politics that goes within the queer circle. This is something I am against. This is something I do not advocate. This is something I do not engage or participate in. The whole going to a place and having just one person as represent the entire 8 states of Northeast with so much of ethnicity, so much of cultural differences being here. And it's the same with the whole NRC process also. So when I have to speak about NRC, I can talk how, me being not being seen as a like ethnic community of Assam or Northeast, how it affects me, and it will be it might be a similar case, or it might be more disturbing or different for a person, as you said, like for a trans person or a non-binary person who might be Muslim, or say Dalit Muslim, because we do have Dalit. We do have Dalit voices, Dalit people community living here in Northeast, which is not visible, which is whose voices are not heard, or even the T tribes, how it is for a T tribe person, and what their incident, how their thing has been with the NRC. It goes a long way. Like like for a gay person or a lesbian person, how it has been being thrown out of the house and not having the access to documents. How will they prove the citizenship? These are the many different. We can actually write a book on this. Then actually document a book. It is something which I cannot talk, in 2 minutes or 5 minutes. There are so many layers that come under it. And when we go for, like say, talks or something like that, we make a point that communal violence, everything is not in isolation. It is very much a problem within the queer community also. Caste violence, caste differences, caste, class, ethnic differences, and violence because of its language barriers differences. I have people who have migrated from other districts here in Guwahati and who work as daily wage earners. And I repeatedly call them to participate in the events. Some are and some have dreams of being singers, dancers. And in one of our events, Ullas, to celebrate Section 377 anniversary last year, I called one of the persons to do a dance performance, and he's a very great dancer. He simply couldn't, because he couldn't be on the stage where he feels as an alien, where he feels alienated, because the stark difference is there because of not being able to converse in English or good Hindi, or even in perfect Assamese. So, or to able to strike up a conversation. So I can understand this is something I also have kind of dealt with in my initial years of struggle. I have also dealt with in my initial, when I was trying to get support here, when I was trying to find out something here, when I was trying to connect with individuals here. This is something I was kind of going through the whole dilemma of not belonging. I wanted to actually relocate to another place. I never thought that I could be this person who could talk about, be here and talk so openly about issues, and have so much of experience about my own work and discuss it, and so all of that thing. So, and I actually see other people and think, oh, wish I could be that. So my journey in itself has been something that I cherish the most. Like if you have to say what is something that I take away from all my years of work as a community mobilizer and as a change maker, I would say my own personal journey. Nothing more, nothing less, because it has been completely rewarding. Even when we say about LGBT issues, people see in a very isolated way. Oh, LGBT issues, but no, it has helped me in being a leader. It has greatly improved my like say my other many capabilities, my capacities. It has made me, it has empowered me, it has done a lot of wonderful things to me. So this is what I also want to give away to the community. I believe that no matter where a person is from, none of them have to migrate to another place anywhere in the country or in the world just for their sexuality. This is something I would feel very heartbroken if something like this happens. This is why I focus so much on localizing queer support, mobilizing the people, creating support groups, and being all the time for people at distress and always hearing them out and just being there, because it really does makes a difference. This is what I got, and this is something I cherish, and this is something, the greatest thing that one can give, an empathetic listening ears, and just being there for a person who is confused, who is scared, who is vulnerable, and just helping the person through.
Okay, thank you, Shivlal. We just have a couple of questions so far from the audience that maybe you could answer. One is from Preeti, and she asks, is enabling gay marriage in India an important issue for LGBT groups in Assam? Can you also speak on how NRC demands are different in the state?
Can you repeat the question again? I kind of
Is
didn't get it.
enabling gay marriage in India an important issue
Hmm.
for LGBT groups in Assam? Can you also speak on how NRC demands are different in the state?
Can NRC demand a different?
In the state. In the state of Assam.
Okay. Um, like, say when it comes to marriage equality or same-sex marriage, it is it is in its own very complicated. It doesn't solve everything. I'm not saying it's not important. It is important. It is one of the rights that people should enjoy. But the conversation shouldn't revolve around it. The conversation shouldn't start and end in this. Because let's admit, will a marriage equality give us the right to adopt a baby or to opt for surrogacy? Both of which specifically says about adoption and about surrogacy. Sushma Swaraj went on record saying homosexuals, gay lesbians are against the ethos of our morality, Indian morality. That is something you can Google. That is something she went on record saying. So, you do not have that right. Will marriage equality include this? Will marriage equality also help us dealing with workplace violence, discrimination, the whole bullying, the whole suicides that is happening? Will it erase it? Will it make sure that like we will get the right to inherit the our partner's property legally without the interference of their family, biological family, or say rent a house or buy properties together? Will it address all of it? Will it also address in gender like gender specific laws for the LGBTQ community? So we have to think about all these lines. Will marry, because why I'm raising all of this is that the moment we rally behind marriage equality, see, my politics is clear. I want to get married. Okay, that is something I have always been dreaming of since I was a kid. The whole Yashraj Dharma Productions kind of a marriage, happy and everything. This is something I have grown up with, and this is something I want. But I also know the harms of, if I rally my voice against it, it will all end up in this marriage, marriage, marriage. See what is happening in US. All the 50 states have marriage equality, all the 50 states, but there is no law, anti-discriminatory law, which protects the LGBTQ people. So what is the even use of marriage equality? I can still get married the way I want to, the whole dharma production, the whole yashraj kind of a marriage that I want to, I can still get married. I just won't get a legal recognition. But anyway, even if the legal recognition is coming to me, what else it is giving? It's not giving me anything else. So what it actually does, it dilutes the other various other serious issues. We have to admit that marriage is a right, but it is not an utmost necessity. It is not something that we have to immediately have. What we immediately have to have is equal opportunities, and whatever I mentioned earlier. How many trans people are in colleges or in university or in schools? Do we have reports of of the experience of trans people or or the queer people in schools, and have they been engaging with the school authorities over it, of making gender neutral toilets? Trans people do not, non-binary people, trans people do not attend nature calls. They do not go to toilets the entire day from morning to evening. Institute like TIS Guwahati doesn't have a gender neutral toilet. Trans people, my friends, trans friends, non-binary friends who have studied in TIS Guwahati, I do not know of the other TIS, because why I'm openly telling the name of TIS, because it promotes itself as the epitome of educational colleges, institutes, which is inclusive and diverse and everything, but it fails to have even one gender neutral toilet. And my friends have refused, or they have not had a single drop of water from morning 9 a.m. till 9:30 p.m. Imagine that. Imagine not going to use a washroom because that is gender dysphoric to us. How horrible that is. I don't have to think twice because I'm a cis gay man. I don't have to think twice when I have to go use a washroom. I even openly pee when it's an urgency and I don't get a washroom nearby. But that is not what the experience for other people is. So these are many things that we have to concentrate on. These are many basic things. And again, as you said about NRC, I think I mentioned that of keep writing about it, keep discussing about it, keep telling people of the various impacts of the NRC process on trans people, on the queer people, keep advocating with the like the state director, the state project manager of NRC. Go file petitions, go file RTIs, to do bring a database, a strong database that a government cannot refuse to overlook. That is how we go ahead in including people in the NRC process. And no, saying we don't want NRC is not going to help. NRC is already there. Of course, if it happened some 7-8 years back, it would have been completely different. But having, as I again said previously, NRC here is a result of people's movement. No one forced. It's the people of the voices of the people. I'm talking about the majority of the voices of the people who wanted the NRC process. And there's a lot of violence that happened here. So, when we join the narrative of the people of other places in the country, we are not helping. We are actually creating more rifts. We are actually creating more differences, which is not helping anyone. So what we actually should demand specifically for Assam is that make it inclusive of the community. That's all I have to say about the NRC. I hope I answered that.
Yes, thank you. Then we have one more question from Samhita, which is that during the COVID lockdown period, what are the activities that your group does? And have you faced any problem due to the diversity of gender identities that you share?
Yes. So, say first question, when during the whole COVID situation, what we did is that we did various sorts of fundraising, one time we did a fundraising to help the Hijra community, but of course it got mired in unnecessary, um, say, controversy and conflict by people with vested interest. By people who couldn't see beyond themselves, and these are people who call themselves community leaders, and this is what they have been doing. They couldn't see that the Hijra persons are one of the most vulnerable population, and any help coming from any other source is actually doing good for them. And we were the only group which was targeted. There were many other groups which were kind of supporting the community, the Hijra community I'm talking about, but none of them were protested against. It was only us, and the reason for that was community politics. I can say very openly about that because there is a lot of emotional harassment, mental harassment that was given to me with threats of FIR, lies about giving FIRs, multiple FIRs in my name and all of that thing as fraud and all of that thing, using very uncharitable words against me and the organization. Come on now. So, and of course, I'm disheartened and kind of bitter about my experience with that and the whole negative publicity that was going on. And I will not sugarcoat or hide things because I have nothing at fault here. So that is something we had to kind of deal with initially. After that, we got a bit smarter to avoid all of these unnecessary conflicts. Thankfully for us, there were also kind of young group people who are very young. Some of them they sold their paintings, art materials, and they donated those whatever money they raised to us. And in our capacity, we identified the most vulnerable people across various identities, say queer people who are HIV positive, or people who need it for the mental health therapy, or for their hormones, or for paying their rent, or paying their like for the food expenses. We clearly refused taking help from organizations which are offering us help with 1 or 2 kilos of rice and a few potatoes and half a kg of sugar, because we wanted to stay clear of that politics of bigger organizations which will show that oh, they help the queer people and they will get more funds in their name, and the community wouldn't be helped. What will the community will do with 1 kg of rice and half a kg of potato and half a kg of sugar? It's insulting. It's very insulting. So a lot of people actually even told us, why don't you give 1,000, 2,000 people and give it to a lot of people? Say target 100 people, you'll have a lot of things to show in your report. But that is not how we went. We could have given it to 100 and 200 of people, but that is not how we went ahead. We went ahead with what was the need of that particular person and how much the person required to sustain themselves for a period of 1 year, and that is how we distributed the fund. So for some people, we paid them, we donated them 10,000, for some 5,000, for some 3,000, 4,000, some 8,000. That is how we went ahead. And the reason also to give money was also we knew that these people will save that money. They will also realize that the help is temporary and they will try to save as much money as possible. And some of them needed it for their medicines. Some of their family would have health issues. Some of them themselves would have health issues. And even some of them very unfortunate. Some of them even wouldn't have medicines to buy, money to buy medicines for their blood pressures, or even for very basic thing. So this is all what we helped with. And even now the help is ongoing since March to present. We have been helping people not just financially. Right now what we have been doing is that whatever merchandise we had through Queer Pride Guwahati that we purchased way back in 2017, we have been selling those merchandise now unfortunately, not a lot of people have come forward to buy those merchandise. And we have been expecting a lot of support for people to buy that merchandise. You know, uh, I can afford to buy a T-shirt which costs 500. You know, I get a T-shirt, and at the same time, I also help someone in need. But that 500 for one trans person means he, she, they can buy hormone replacement medicines, tablets for 2 weeks. It means a lot. We might not understand this basic thing, but it means a lot. And people who have not worked on ground, people who do not have experience of working with the community, will never understand how much that 100 or 500 of donation of or helping really does to people. People have actually cried, and people have actually thanked us endlessly because they thought we were just kind of making false kind of assurances or all of that thing. So this is what and it's not just that. Even emotionally supporting people, say, as I said, there have been a lot of cases of family violence. There have been cases of people who have who we have helped leave their like biological home and go and live with the partners in another city. So these are the challenges that we face. There are teens who are forced to go to psychiatrists that the parents want. So what we have also been doing is that finding out whether the psychiatrist is queer affirmative or not. And if they are not queer affirmative, we threaten them that this phone conversation has been recorded and we are going to get the license cancelled if they give any sort of negative feedback or therapy to a queer person. These are the way, because it's very important. Someone has to do all of these things, and we have come up with a helpline that is the runs 24/7. People can drop us text messages. People can also give us call anytime of the day or night they want to, and it is free of cost. So we also have help them, provide them peer counseling, emotional support, and if it is a very serious issue, we connect them with a professional. We also act as a gatekeeper of suicide prevention. And we ourselves, I myself have been uh, part of courses, online courses, where I have been learning about suicide gatekeeping, about suicide prevention, and about providing emotional support and do's and don'ts and all of that thing. So these are also the steps that we are taking, because the whole COVID situation was all of a sudden the lockdown, and the challenges that all of it came sudden. It was kind of, we never expected it, we never saw it coming. So it also kind of pushed us to do things way more than we earlier did. So this is, I think, more or less how it has been going. And so again, as I said, I think when it comes to COVID situation, the most affected groups within the queer community are the ones who come from informal sector, without having a 9 to 5 job, who are either working as beauticians, or who are freelancing as beauticians, or who are modeling, or who are students going with the whole hormone replacement therapy, or people who are dancers, who conduct events, who perform at events, who are also, if I may say, there's a word called Londa Nach, which means, it's kind of a cultural thing that happens. A lot of trans women and non-binary hijra person do that. Uh, so I think more or less this is how we have been going with our whole process of helping people in the whole COVID situation. I cannot think of anything right now, but if I have something, I'll definitely put it up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Shivlal. Any further questions from the audience? We can have maybe one question more. If anybody wants to ask a question, you can unmute yourself and ask. Any further questions from the audience? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Shivlal.
Thank you, Kiran.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your experiences. We look forward to hearing more from you, but please do keep writing, keep expressing yourself, keep voicing your concerns, and we wish you luck and strength and power.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being there today. We'll reconvene next Thursday. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.